I also often give people the example of famous books that were initially written in one way and are only really the way they are now because editors came in and made certain suggestions. So for example, The Great Gatsby is a big novel that everybody seems to love and is really, really respected. But really, The Great Gatsby was only a name that was insisted upon by other people, like the editor Maxwell Perkins. F. Scott Fitzgerald was not a person who was really, really wild about it. He wanted to call it a bunch of other things, like Trimalchio and West Egg, Under the Red, White, and Blue, a bunch of weird titles that just did not work. It was only because the editor kind of put his foot down and said, no, we're staying with this, Great Gatsby is what it is, that's what's going to make it sell. Also, you think of On the Road. Jack Kerouac wrote that in a long, long scroll, uninterrupted, very little, if any, punctuation, very little, if any, paragraphs, just this kind of long stream of consciousness narrative, and he brought it into his editor's office and wanted it published like that, or he wanted the publisher to put it out in that way. And the editor had to really wrangle and have it put into a way where, no, it has to have punctuation and paragraphs and a kind of 5-book structure to carry the reader through. So those are just 2 examples of places where, despite all the kind of brilliance and talent that different writers had, they really still created their most beloved work with the guiding hand of an editor in some ways, so it's not something to completely write off. In another sense, you might be asking yourself in a more general or abstract way, why should I be doing this? If I'm a writer or a person into creative writing or writing nonfiction, why would I want to be submitting to literary journals or magazines? Because the market has changed quite a bit. And even though it has changed, it doesn't mean it has lost worth or lost value in terms of being something that you want to pursue. So it is true that, if you were writing back in the 1920s or 30s or 40s, publication of a story in a really, really high-paying magazine or a really well-known or respected magazine could be the thing that kind of makes your name. So, J.D. Salinger with A Perfect Day for Banana Fish appearing in the New Yorker really, really set him on the path to becoming a kind of big literary star. But I kind of think of it like TV channels now. You used to have 3-4 channels and a massive portion of the viewing audience that tuned into each thing, like the conclusion of MASH, or, the Beatles, or Elvis on television in North America for the first time. But now, we have thousands upon thousands of channels and probably a smaller fraction of the viewing audience for each one. This is something that people started noticing with mimeograph machines coming out around the mid-20th century, where people could now create a journal and a magazine in their garage. And all of a sudden, the market became massively flooded with many places to publish and a smaller fraction of the reading audience per each one. And that's a tradition that's continued with e-publications and digital journals and journals that exist only kind of in an online format, although there are still also many that are still in print. But because of that, a publication in one probably isn't going to rake in a huge readership. I'm not saying it will never, but it's less likely now than it maybe once was. But as a result, there are still benefits, even if they're a little bit different. So here are some of the reasons that you should be submitting your writing to literary journals, no matter what experience level you have, whether you're starting out or moderately successful or you've done a lot of other books. Here are some benefits. 1, it makes you have a stronger profile and it strengthens your brand if you're planning on submitting a longer book, like a novel or a short story collection or a collection of essays or a memoir, whatever it happens to be. If the editor of the publication looks at you and says, okay, this person is submitting a book, but they have kind of been out there and they've published several short pieces or excerpts before, it kind of shows that you have some kind of credibility and that you have some kind of familiarity with the industry that you're trying to pursue. And it also shows that you're a go-getter and a person who can keep track of and chase down opportunities and who has that kind of drive. Another benefit is that it develops a really highly owned sense of discipline. It takes discipline to keep submitting places, even to persist through rejections, to keep sending writing out, and to keep up with that. And it's something you can easily fall off with. But if you can keep up with that kind of practice, it develops a real kind of sense of sense of discipline, and it forces you to kind of keep your ears and eyes open for different opportunities. I also think that getting experience with editorial suggestions and editors is also a very valuable thing for writers to get comfortable with and to get used to. Because if you can get used to having people kind of edit and make suggestions when you're doing short stories and poems and articles, that'll make you be able to handle that process a lot easier, or handle that process a lot better when you're submitting a full book, because maybe there isn't a lot of financial risk in putting out a short story and part of a journal, but if an editor is putting in the time and the effort to put out your full-length book, they're definitely going to have editorial suggestions, and that's something that maybe you can sometimes avoid. It doesn't happen as often with the periodical market, like with short stories and poems and articles, but with a full-length book, it's very much going to happen in terms of a lot of editing and rounds of editing as well. And getting used to that is really, really good training. And also in terms of like the rejections that you weather, that also kind of builds up kind of tougher skin to those sorts of things and gets you more used to it, so that when the inevitable dry spells or pitfalls of publishing and writing happen, I find you're able to weather those with a lot more confidence. It's not a perfect system, and while not all traditionally published work is good and not all self-published work is bad, the other benefit of having your work published in literary journals or magazines that have that kind of traditional model where they review suggestions, reject some, take others, is that it does help a reader, particularly in a large marketplace, to know that this writer has that stamp of approval. Somebody in the world of writing has looked at it, it's gone through different test readers, and people have looked at it, edited it, and it's been selected, and it kind of has that stamp of quality, either assurance or high probability of quality at least. So, to review. Put all your writing into standard manuscript format unless instructed otherwise. Make a decision on whether you're okay with sometimes paying small fees to submit your writing. Become familiar with what blind submissions are, as opposed to submissions where you keep your name on them. You can look up entropymag.org, Submittable, or the Review as just a few possible places where you can find journals and literary magazines that are looking for submissions. You can also use Facebook groups, such as ones that say, call for submissions, to find places to submit your writing. Remember that you're going to face more rejection than you are acceptance, but it happens to everybody, even the best of them, and that persistence through that is key. Do not argue with the rejections that you get, because that's not going to help you, and that's probably just going to make things worse, and it hasn't changed anybody's mind. Don't be completely cut off or shut out to the idea of editing that you might face, because sometimes editorial suggestions can be beneficial. And also be sure that you keep your cover letters short and directly to the point. I would personally recommend avoiding vanity publications or any publication that asks a writer to pay anything more than a small customary submission fee of only a couple dollars. Those do exist, remember, so sometimes you're going to encounter those, but you don't have to do those because there are plenty of places that do not ask for submission fees at all. Remember about the pay scales. You have amateur, self-published, semi-professional and professional, but as you get up to semi-pro and professional, those markets get to be a lot more competitive and a lot more difficult to break into. Also, keep in mind about everything that I've said in this video that these are all my opinions, just things that I've learned, that I've observed, things that I kind of wish I had been told when I started. But again, I'm just one person who's still quite early on in my writing career, and I might be dead wrong. Other people might disagree with me. This is just simply my take. So thank you so much for listening. My name is Paul Edward Costa, again, writer, teacher, spoken word performer, and current Poet Laureate for the city of Mississauga. Hopefully some of these things have helped you, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me through social media or at paul.costa89@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Have a great day.